Another session of Strutting with the Arts with
Nettie and Ann.
Thank you. So nice to have you here, Ann.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Once again,
it helps to be part of a host,
yeah.
to also be interviewed. So
your smile is illuminating
that's
the
so
room,
sweet.
so we're very pleased.
As does yours.
So we want to talk about rhythm in
writing and in poetry and nonfiction and fiction.
Yes.
Briefly, my background is in writing. I started working in journalism about almost 30 years ago. I haven't been writing in journalism all 30 years, but I went to graduate school and I was working in journalism for a long period of time, and I started writing fiction about 10 years ago. And in terms of rhythm, I was never taught how to add rhythm to writing. It didn't come up in graduate school in journalism. It didn't come up as an English major in undergraduate. And I think I just learned it from reading a lot, because when I go back to my older pieces, there is a rhythm to it. And I think it just came from reading a lot and just picking it up. And then I have taken creative writing classes at Sarah Lawrence College. But again, like rhythm specifically hasn't been pointed out. And for this interview today, I did some more research on it. So it's very easy to do, but I think most people probably don't even pick it up necessarily while they're reading. So basically, rhythm is in poetry set up through punctuation and stress patterns in words. I think if you're trying to learn rhythm in writing, the easiest thing to look to is traditional poetry. And I was going to read an example from Dr. Seuss.
Okay, sure.
And this is called the Butter Battle Book, and it was written to teach children tolerance. This is my youngest daughter's favorite Dr. Seuss book. So I'm just going to read a couple pages from it. On the last day of summer, 10 hours before fall, my grandfather took me out to the wall. For a while he stood silent, then finally he said, with a very sad shake of his very old head, "As you know, on this side of the wall, we are Ukes. On the far other side of the wall live the Zooks." Then my grandfather said, "It's high time that we knew of the terrible, horrible thing that Zooks do. In every Zook house and in every Zook town, every Zook eats his bread with the butter side down." So it's talking about like ridiculous divisions between people, but you can clearly see where the stresses are as you're reading it in the sentences. And it's usually like the second word in or the last word in. And then in another form of poetry, which is more conversational and loose, is that I was going to give as an example, is Gabriel, a poem by Edward Hirsch. And this is written in 3-line stanzas, which means there's 3 lines of text and then there's a break. And you can visually see the break on the page, but that's what gives the reader pause, and that's what adds to the rhythm of it. This was written about, it's a eulogy to his son who died in his 20s, and it's a book-length poem. So it's a different type of poetry, but you'll pick up the rhythm in it. The funeral director opened the coffin, and there he was alone, from the waist up. I peered down into his face, and for a moment I was taken aback, because he was not Gabriel. It was just some poor kid whose face looked like a room that had been vacated. But then I looked more intently at his heavy eyelids and fine features. He had always been a restive sleeper. Now he was weirdly still, my reckless boy. Dressed up for a special occasion, he liked that navy blue suit and preened over himself in the mirror. "Hey, college boy," the guy called out on the streets of Northampton, "you look sharp in those new duds." He loved the way he looked after he stopped taking the meds. That fogged his mind. He admired himself in store windows and revolving doors when his reflection turned. Now he looked rigid and buttoned up, like he was going to a funeral on a Friday in early September, which is tragic, but it's so beautifully written. This was longlisted for the National Book Award when it came out. So it's two different forms of it, but reading poetry is a wonderful way if you're trying to learn, about rhythm.
Absolutely.
And then in fiction and nonfiction, there are very basic ways that it's incredible how simple it is. Rhythm is created. And the first way, it has to do with sentence length. It's a variation of it. So long sentences tend to be smooth, depending on the writing, and short sentences are abrupt. And so it's a combination of those that, that creates a rhythm. And I can give an example if you'd like, or do you want to talk more about it?
I mean, you said you went through grad school, you went through undergrad.
Nobody ever taught
and
rhythm.
it was never taught.
Right.
Or was there an
Maybe
assumption?
I was asleep during that class.
Was there an assumption that
So-
it would just be learned by osmosis?
I don't know. I honestly don't know what the assumption is, but I know rhythm just wasn't brought up. But writing nonfiction is a very particular type of writing, and if you're doing hard news, there's certain things you have to do, and then feature writing, I would think, sort of gets more into rhythm, like a lyric kind of rhythm. But I think a lot of it is just your ear. You have to pick it up.
Yeah.
But there are very simple ways, literally like sentence structure. And then the second way that it's done isn't sentence structure, but it has to do with subject matter. And it's what we've been talking about so far. So it's like these peaks and valleys that you read. And there's certain authors who are, excellent at doing it. Like James Patterson is excellent at doing it. So you're just turning the pages because it's a wave that he creates in the suspense. And another person would be David Sedaris, who's a satirist, and he writes short stories. And he's funny, but there's something very serious that comes up in every one of his stories. But after something serious, there's something lighthearted or something funny. And he calls it a release valve because the audience needs that. Like they need the tension to build up to pay attention, but then they need the release valve. And so then that brings him back down, and then he's getting them ready to do it all over again. But James Patterson does that in thrillers and mysteries, and he does it in short stories. There's another book, A Woman in the Window by A.J. Flynn, that's been made into a movie. And literally it's like every chapter, you're on this ride. And when rhythm is done well, when authors do it well, I think it's good for the audience because you're aware, it's suspenseful because you don't know the storyline, but you're aware that you're in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing. Like they're going to bring you up and then they're going to bring you down. And I think it makes the whole experience of reading something more pleasurable.
So what would you say to young writers about rhythm?
So I would say that there's some very basic rules, which is the sentence length and then the subject matter, creating arcs in the subject matter, a variation of sentences. But from what I've been told and from what I've read is it's important to read your work out loud. So you write it and then you read it aloud, or you can use an app that will actually read off the page and read it back to you, or have someone read it to you, or friends read it. And then you look for the rhythm. And if you don't hear it, then you just look at the sentence and you break it down, and then you rearrange parts of it. And you just keep doing it until you get it right. You take out the words that are extra, that are unnecessary, and you just start to pare it down. And one of the things they suggest is listening to hip hop music, or certain types of musicians in advance, reading Shakespeare, returning to Shakespeare, or revisiting, is how it was worded. And then what was the other tip that they gave? Trying to think. Oh, listen to great speeches. Listen to Martin Luther King, his speech, and then just to get the rhythm of it.
Yeah.
So those are the tips that I would
it's
give.
just,
And it's practice, honestly. It's just
is.
writing and writing and writing and writing.
And it's, babies to me is sometimes my best practice tools, when they do things like pa 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 ta 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 ta, it helps to build, but you might not be aware of the rhythm that you're writing. So who is it? I mean, you gave some good examples. Are there others in the list that is more important than the other?
I mean, I think there's so many different types. Like I brought Toni Morrison's book Jazz, given like this is like related to
Could
music.
you?
Yeah, and I'd love to read
Yes.
from that. So Toni Morrison passed away recently,
Mhm.
but she, won the Nobel Prize in Literature. And this story takes place in Harlem in the 1920s. I think it's 1926, and it's about a love triangle, and it's between a husband, his teenage girlfriend, and his wife.
Mhm.
And the reason it's called Jazz is because it's taking place at that time when jazz is being produced. And I'll just read
Please.
from her first, the beginning of the first chapter. Sith, I know that woman. She used to live with a flock of birds on Lenox Avenue. Know her husband, too. He fell for an 18-year-old girl with one of those deep-down, spooky loves that made him so sad and happy. He shot her just to keep the feeling going. When the woman, her name is Violet, went to the funeral to see the girl and to cut her dead face, they threw her to the floor and out of the church. She ran, then, through all the snow, and when she got back to her apartment, she took the birds from their cages and set them out the window to freeze or fly, including the parrot that said, I love you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. She's just incredible. But yeah, like, so you can, she doesn't have as much punctuation, but it's the way the sentences are broken down. And there is a variety of shorter and longer, but there's also a number of like clauses within it, which is like sort of like a shorter, it can read like a shorter.
In biblical times, they didn't really have a lot of punctuation, but it was felt until English started to invoke punctuation.
Force order
Force,
to it.
yeah. Because when I look at the earlier scrolls, they didn't have a lot of these, punctuation.
So a writer like that would be Jack Kerouac and On the Road, and it's just stream of consciousness, and it's just, I don't know if that relates, but it was just to the intensity. It's like you're reading it and you can barely take a breath, but
Right.
there was a purpose to that. So maybe similarly, I'm not, maybe a little bit different, but it's like one big long run.
Yeah, that's how the earlier scrolls were. Okay.
Okay,
It was
Hi.
nice
Yes.
having you,
thank you.
Anne, and again, we're going to be working together
Yes.
for a long time.
Yes,
So thanks for coming. And really, rhythm is in every genre, and I want the exploration of this to continue, because a lot of people must be aware of what rhythm is.
without even being aware of it.
Yeah, so it's natural. So once again, thank you. This
Thank
is Strutting with the Arts with
With Nettie.